Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own Small or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by Gesshoo, and you can find the link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by Dani.
Small, Chapter 11. Sarah Alder had been alive longer than some bloodlines, longer even than the formal existence of the United States of America. She had been flesh and blood, power and enchantment, for age upon modern age. Centuries of mechanics and animation, and yet Sarah wasn't certain she had ever truly breathed until that very moment. The air rushed in like water from a spring, cleansing and shock cold and perfect, and Sarah breathed because there was Tally, her Tally, lying in the stark white bed, her hair silky and thin once more, pooling in auburn puddles around her cheeks. Her face a bit more hollowed and graced by just the slightest touch of age, scrunched at the gaps Sarah hadn't meant to sound. And then her eyes. Oh, Tally's warm brown eyes, once again heavy with the lifetimes of joy and grief and growth she'd come to know in just a few short years, fluttered open and found her, found Sarah. A wonder, an epiphany, something altogether outside of words or definition, deepened her gaze until she was looking at Sarah with such profound affection, such immense knowing, that Sarah's newfound ability to breathe left her again in an instant. Slowly, Tally reached out, her arm a bit shaky as she held her hand aloft, palm up and waiting. Britt garbled her voice, the effort of their earlier work having strained Tally's chords to their limit and run her throat raw in the process. The one word she'd uttered was quiet, little more than a barely there whisper that wouldn't thrive or carry. But Sarah heard it like the crack of a storm in a summer sky. Thunder clapped at the edges of her ears and rocked through her body in potent vibrations. Sarah. And Sarah wasn't one to cry. Never had been truly, at least not in an unbridled way that some women seem able. She grieved well enough, ached more often than not, and wasn't unaccustomed to having tears burning at the edges of her eyelids, but she rarely cried, that madness of clawing, that tugging of edges that pulled one wide open, right at the heart, and allowed all the turmoil free. Those torn asunder sobs and wails that had long been the anthem of stirred souls riddled with hope or fear in the face of long odds. No, Sarah couldn't, wouldn't, not after some 300 years of strict composure and quiet pain. She'd too long feared that, were she to do so, she'd never recollect herself after. She'd never been afforded the right to heal, to retain her title and dignity despite having been exposed as all too human. Goddess knew she'd never been given much room to roam, or feel, by herself or any other. No, she wasn't one to cry, not like that. But when those two ragged syllables drifted through Tally's lips, The lips Sarah had fallen in love with, the one she'd kissed quiet and breathless on the Beltane night that had changed both their lives, the one she whispered against under sheets in nightfall more times than she could count. Oh, Sarah cried. The sob that rocked up and wrenched from her throat was so guttural, so desperate, so animal, that it couldn't be anything but need. Need and work. The walls rattled around them, shaking everything in the vicinity until Sarah felt the soothing balm of Anakosht's hand on her shoulder. The other landed at the small of her back, pressing support into her frame. Hey, I'm okay, Tally said as she stretched a bit farther on the bed. Her voice, a tired, grainy whisper, did little to convince Sarah of the truth in her words, but the room ceased its shaking nonetheless. She wiggled her fingers at Sarah. Come here, please. Sarah couldn't explain it, but her feet suddenly felt frozen to the floor, glued in place. Fear gripped her heart like an angry fist. The fear that if she breathed, if she moved, if she blinked, all of this would disappear, and she would find herself back in a reality she wasn't certain she could abide much longer, or worse, a reality in which Tally didn't exist at all, small or otherwise. A reality in which love had never found her, in which Sarah Alder was little more than a ghost, a shell, a legend trapped in flesh and paint and time. Her hands shook. Her heart wouldn't stop hammering. Her nose ran like a burst dam, and her eyes weren't much better. Sarah hadn't felt so utterly useless and unable to act since she stood, hands bound behind her back, and everything she'd ever been taught thick and paralyzed in her throat, as her sister's dying nerves twitched her swinging feet until they finally fell still. But this, now? This was different, wasn't it? Tally wasn't dying. She wasn't disappearing. No, this... Sarah, look at me. Sarah blinked. What was Tally talking about? She hadn't been able to look at anything but her, not since the moment she pulled the curtain aside. Looking at Tally was all her wretched body had allowed her to do since she found and lost her breath and, apparently, her sanity in the space of that single second's long reveal. Look at me, Tally said again, and finally it clicked. Sarah understood. Tally wasn't telling her to look at her. Not really. She was telling Sarah to see her. See that she was there. She was alive. She was herself again. Everything was as it was meant to be once more. And just like that, Sarah's rigid body released every ounce of its tension, and in a flash of a moment, she was across the scant space and fallen into Tally's arms like rain into a river, colliding, sinking, becoming. Another sob shook through her lips as she buried her face in Tally's hair and neck and felt Tally's arms wring and clutch her. Sarah grabbed at Tally's back, partly exposed from the thin opening of her infirmary gown, and she held on as if she was certain the slightest bit of release would result in Tally floating away like dandelion's parts caught in a summer wind. Tally held her just as tightly, and goddess, it felt right. Sarah felt immersed in her scent, her touch, her love that had never been anything less than full body. And her full body was right again, right in Sarah's arms, fitting at every juncture. You're here, Sarah cried against Tally's rapidly thumping pulse. I'm here. You're you. I'm me, Tally murmured, turning her face in just enough to nuzzle Sarah's ear with the tip of her nose. Sarah sat up, trembling, and reached for Tally's cheeks. You're you. The affection in Tally's teary eyes pulled a smile to her lips as she wrapped her hands around Sarah's and held them in place. Private Tally Craven, she said. United States Army. Former biddy. Former baby. A wet laugh burst through Sarah's lips as Tally chuckled and brought their foreheads together. Sarah closed her eyes as Tally's breath puffed against her lips. Current and forever soulmate of the great General Sarah Alder. Tally freed another soft, strained laugh as she raised the sheet from her lap and wiped Sarah's cheeks and nose clean. The great and messy General Sarah Alder, she amended, and Sarah tried as hard as she could to hold it in, but her body paid her no heed. Another sob soared up in her throat and out, and she gripped Tally like the last line of defense. A final, fragile barrier between life and death, between joy and grief. You're you, she whispered, the words broken and shaky. You're really you again. I'm me again, Tally promised, and Sarah cried even harder. She cried and laughed and wrapped her arms so tightly around Tally she was certain it had to hurt, but she couldn't help herself. And she knew Tally didn't mind. Her soulmate held her just as fiercely, just as unrelentingly, just as she always had. A throat clearing barely startled them, and Sarah didn't move to see Anacostia face. She wasn't sure she'd ever be able to let Tally go long enough to look at anything else again. But then Tally was peeling their chests apart to allow the slightest space between. Sarah loathed every centimeter of it, but at least Tally didn't let her far, still holding tightly to her arms, swiping her thumbs soothingly along the inside of Sarah's elbows. Anacostia, Tally said warmly, and Sarah followed her eyes. Anacostia's were sheen and bright, happy. She nodded at Tally, her arms clasped behind her back, spine unfurled. She was a picture of authority and one of love, and for the first time, Sarah saw resemblance between herself and her daughter, one she hoped Anacostia saw as well. Welcome back, Craven, Anacostia said with a small but tender smile. What? No more sweet girl? Sarah challenged, and both Anacostia and Tally stiffened. Tally's cheeks rosied as Anacostia cleared her throat. Anything I may or may not have said to 5-year-old Tally has now been relegated to the past, and so I am afraid I cannot speak on the matter, she said and turned sharply towards the half-open curtain. Now, I'll give you two some privacy. I'm sure you'd like time to get reacquainted. She paused to send Sarah a pointed stare. Not too much time, though, Mother. I don't think we'll be able to keep the two leeches out much longer. They've been glued to the doors for hours, and Isadora said Bellwether looked ready to try storming her way in. Literally. And that was over 20 minutes ago, so... Understood, Sarah said, watching as Anacostia pulled the curtain closed, and a shadow fell over the small, round space encompassing Tally's infirmary bed. The sound of her daughter's steps still echoed as Tally let out a long, mortified groan, and Sarah turned quickly back to her. She raised one hand to Tally's cheek. What is it, my love? Are you in pain? Or does it hurt? I'm fine, Tally assured her, squeezing Sarah's arms again. Oh, it's just... Her shoulders slumped and her expression crumpled into something caught between embarrassment and amusement. She totally saw my butt, like my entire naked butt. The anxiety that had suddenly seized Sarah's chest released into a soft rush of laughter. It touched them both gently, then grew until they were shaking with it in each other's arms. It was your 5-year-old butt, if that makes it any better, Sarah said, and Tally groaned again. No, not helping. No. Sarah ran the tip of her nose along Tally's cheek, then followed with her mouth, leaving small wet kisses along the trail. She pulled back and rested their foreheads together once more, smiling. Then I'm sorry to have to inform you that several people saw it, not just Anacostia. You weren't exactly shy about it. Tally looked like a beet as she slid off Sarah's forehead and buried her face in her chest. Oh, I can never show my face outside these walls again. Nonsense, Sarah said as she ran her fingers through Tally's hair and laid kisses atop the back of her head. Outside your unit and Anacostia, it was only the biddies, and it seems their own personality traits were mostly to blame. Yarrow apparently has a penchant for nudity. Sarah half expected to hear Yarrow's voice fill her head with one of the woman's ever-ready retorts, but as only her own thoughts echoed, she realized the biddies were keeping their distance, providing her with as much privacy in the moment as they were able. Sarah's chest ached with gratitude. The point being, the biddies have no right to tease you for something that was their own doing, Sarah told her. The same cannot be said, however, for Abigail and Rael. But then I doubt anything short of a court-martial could persuade them from teasing you. Ugh, can we do that? Tally asked. Give them a court-martial? Sarah's laugh bloomed to life once more as she curled a bit of Tally's hair behind her ear. She encouraged her love to look up with the tip of her finger pressed under Tally's chin. When their eyes met, Sarah's laugh eased into a sigh that grew heavier as it left her. Tally, she said quietly, the name a whisper from her very soul. Sarah. Sarah cupped her cheeks and held her gaze. I was terrified. An easy breath slipped from Tally's lips as she pressed her cheek into Sarah's palm. I wasn't, she said, and a brilliant smile slid over her lips, one that drew Sarah's heart open like dusty old drapes being rent apart. All her agony flew like dust, clouded, then fell away. I never had any doubt. With a wet chuckle, Sarah shook her head and leaned in, pressed her lips to Tally's brow. Your optimism, as ever, shines through. No, it's us. Tally curled her hands around Sarah's wrists and rubbed her thumbs along the soft, delicate skin of their interiors. It's you and me. In case you haven't noticed by now, we're kind of inevitable. She squeezed Sarah's wrists and turned to kiss her palms, one after the other. I'm not optimistic when it comes to us, Sarah, she whispered. I'm sure. Fresh tears dropped down Sarah's cheeks as she slowly shook her head and blew a cold breath up toward her stinging eyes. Her voice fell to its quietest whisper, its holiest proclamation given in a tender, private moment to a tender, perfect woman. The way I love you, Tally Craven. I know, Tally said and kissed Sarah's palm again. I know. Sarah leaned in and bumped their noses together. Her top lip grazed over Tally's with a zap of static that Sarah felt spark her body like that first flickering flame of something destined to become wild. Goddess help me, she said, voice cracking. I would tear this world apart to keep you safe. I am safe, Sarah. Tally's breath quickened over Sarah's, colliding and encouraging. I don't need you to tear this world apart. Her grip tightened, her body rocked forward, keening towards Sarah in a way that set Sarah's blood to boiling. Her body drained of relief in the space of a heartbeat and lit anew with near torturous want. I just need you to kiss me. Oh, my love, Sarah whispered and resigned herself to the utter devastation of her composure. She would not be regaining it, not any time soon. Not when the first soft press of Tally's mouth to hers felt like deliverance. A broken cry worked up her throat, and she muted it with another kiss, deeper, harder than the last. Goddess, she couldn't get close enough. She clutched at Tally, the pads of her fingers digging into flesh through her thin gown and pulled her. Pulled her until their bodies were more pain than pleasure, more desperation than desire. And Tally gave and took just as desperately. Her kisses were hard, forceful presses, solid and perfect. Her hands on Sarah's shoulders, her chest, her jaw, held fast and sharp. Her fingers pushed into the underbelly of Sarah's braid and wrenched it furiously loose at the base. She gripped and guided and cried, and Sarah had never known a kiss could be so wonderfully violent. Pain cast from distance and time, from a love so wholly divine that it demanded sacrifice. Tears melded together, slipping and sliding over their cheeks as they refused to part, and Sarah wasn't sure whose they were. Hers? Tally's? Both? All she knew was that she couldn't stop. She couldn't let go. Till finally, the pressure eased, Tally's lips softening against hers, and then the first small flick of her tongue sent a thrill down Sarah's spine. Tingles erupted at the base and danced there. Sarah opened up for her and felt her eyes roll back for the first molten invasion, but it was Tally who broke the quiet. A bodied moan vibrated in her throat and limbs, her body shaking as she shifted until she was climbing into Sarah's lap. Her legs looped Sarah's middle with practiced ease, and Sarah's hands dropped to Tally's ass on instinct, drawing her heat closer. Tally rocked against her once, twice, licking into her mouth as if she required relearning, a thorough exploration to memorize every wet inch of Sarah inside and out. Sarah, she panted as she rocked a bit harder, and another moan left her, curling right into the hollow of Sarah's ear as Tally kissed up her jaw and licked around the shell of it. Oh, goddess, I miss this. Sarah shuddered and gripped Tally harder, driving her love's hips into a more constant motion. Tally's nudity under her gown only made the effort more potent. Her heat emanated, a damp patch forming at the apex of her thighs. I missed you. Tally's breath swallowed against Sarah's ear. Show me. So, not to be a twat block or anything, because we all know you need it, Alicia said, her voice spilling through Sarah's mind like cold water down her spine. But, just a quick reminder that you are in the infirmary and not your bedroom. The groan that tore from Sarah's throat sparked a bright, airy laugh from Tally, and Sarah was certain she'd never heard anything more beautiful. Tally pulled back to smile at her, her grin so wide that it dimpled both cheeks. She stilled her rocking hips and cupped Sarah's face. Not interested? You know I am, Sarah said, dropping her forehead to rest against Tally's chin. Her fingers flexed around Tally's ass, kneading and sliding up to the low of her back. But this is not the place for it. I know, Tally said with another soft, sweet laugh. She ran her thumb over Sarah's top lip, then her bottom. I just like to rile you up. Sarah groaned again, an obnoxiously loud sound that she had no desire to muzzle. You know, I think child you was such a handful that I'd grown to idolize you like this. Now I'm remembering how much of a menace you were at this age as well. Tally's giggle was positively devilish, and Sarah loved her so much that she felt she could float for Tally's weight not holding her down. But look at these dimples, she said, and Sarah rolled her eyes. She reached up and pressed a thumb right into one. Yes, she sighed, unable and unwilling to hide her own smile. I suppose you have a point. I love you so much. Tally laughed and sealed the statement with a firm kiss, the most precious, erotic kiss of Sarah's life. She couldn't put a reason to it, only knew that it was true. She felt it in her body, in parts of her body that only ever seemed to wake in Tally's presence, part of her spirit, her essence, her destiny. Incoming! Anakashta's shout had barely finished before the pounding of boots echoed in, and not a moment later, the curtain that had cloaked their tender reunion shrieked with a rough pull, and they were exposed. Almost instantly, Rael squawked like a chicken caught by its feet and dropped the large duffel bag she had in hand. Abigail then promptly tripped over the bag as her hand shot up to cover her face. She only managed to miss the floor by falling into Rael's arms instead. "Oh, goddess!" she cried as Rael struggled to hold her up. "My eyes!" "It burns!" Rael screeched, thrusting her nose up in the air and eyes to the ceiling as she dragged herself and Abigail backward. "It burns!" Tally laughed so hard that she snorted, while Sarah merely rolled her eyes and sighed. "As if I and every other superior on this base haven't caught you in far more compromising positions, Abigail Bellwether," she droned, but Abigail was too busy tossing her head. "I'm blind!" she mock sobbed. "I've been blinded, shitbird! Help! Fix me!" "Alas, I cannot!" Rael cried as she held Abigail with one arm and dramatically covered her face with the other. "For I, too, have been robbed of my sight." "Shut up and hug me!" Tally screeched, and before Sarah could protest, she popped herself off Sarah's lap and leapt onto her sisters, all lanky, long limbs and wild giggles. You know people are trying to heal in here, right?" Yarrow's voice floated through Sarah's mind. "Oh, you're fine," Ophelia responded. "You're napping, not healing." "Excuse you? It was a good-ass nap." "Then. But I'm up now, so what I'd miss?" "Almost sex in Tally's infirmary bed," Kate chimed. Sarah expected Yarrow to have some wildly inappropriate reply, but all that followed the reveal was a series of sleepy guffaws that would have made a horny teenage boy proud. "You're you again!" Rael shouted, the same words that had left Sarah's own lips not so long ago. "Thank the goddess," Abigail said. "No offense, Tal, but baby you was a lot." "A lot of cuteness," Rael argued, and stood on her tiptoes to loop her arm around Tally's neck. "I mean, you're okay like this, but baby you was the best." Tally shoved her. "Thanks, Ray. I love you too." "You do," Rael said. "And I love you. So does Aggie." Abigail's eyes narrowed into slits. "I will murder," she said, and both Tally and Rael fell into one another laughing. It all happened so quickly it nearly made Sarah's head spin, watching them together. The three were sisters, undoubtedly. She could scarcely recall a unit bond stronger than theirs, and she had seen many loyal to a fault. These three, though, there was no fault in their love. It was pure. They snapped back together like a band relieved of its tension, and in seconds, it was as if they'd never been apart, as if nothing had altered or changed them, and no time had passed, as if nothing had ever even happened at all. "Oh, hey, we brought you some clothes," Rael said, grabbing her duffel off the floor. She tossed it on the bed near where Sarah still sat, watching them. "Easy stuff. Some sweats, a t-shirt, and underwear obs." A wide grin stretched Rael's face as she sang, "Panties for Tally." Laughter echoed in from all corners of the infirmary. Rael's and Abigail's, and Akashia's from the other side of the room, and the biddies. Sarah was certain she could make out Isadora's tame chuckle as well, and Sarah herself couldn't help but join in as Tally buried her face in her hands and whined, "I'm never going to live any of this down, am I?" "Not if we have any say in it," Abigail said. "I'm just glad you remember enough to be properly embarrassed, because, girl, you had a crush on my mom, okay? My mom." "She had a crush on you," Rael said and shoved Abigail's shoulder. "Those big puppy dog eyes she got every time Aggie came into the room." "She had a crush on no one," Sarah interrupted firmly and narrowed her eyes at the giggling trio. "Except me, obviously." "Aw, Jelly Sare," Rael teased. "I'm a little embarrassed for you." "Don't make me write you up, Collar. I've been off duty long enough now to have the itch." Rael snorted, not at all threatened. "So, you do remember then, Tal?" she asked. "Everything?" "I was worried you were trapped in there like in Little Tally. I mean, and couldn't tell us or something." "No, Tally frowned as she thought on it. "Honestly, It's hard to explain. It's like I was aware to a certain extent, but not in the sense that I was trapped. I just knew something was off, that I wasn't the way I was supposed to be, but I also wasn't bothered by it because I was a child. Does that make sense? Not really, Rael shrugged, but also yes. And I do remember, Tally told them, but it's weird. It's like the longer I'm awake, the fuzzier the memories are starting to get. Like actual childhood memories that kind of just fade away until you really only remember the big things. Damn! Abigail appeared genuinely disappointed. Does that mean you'll eventually forget? So we only have a limited amount of time to tease you? Tally's frown deepened. I don't know, she said, and then as a group, the three of them turned to Sarah, the question on each of their faces. Sarah balked and laughed. Don't look at me, she said. I may be the oldest person in the room, but I have no answers for you. None of this has ever happened before. What? Rael stared at her, deadpan. You're telling me you've been alive for 300 years, and you've never had a soulmate who sacrificed their youth to become a biddy for you, creating the rarest soul bond ever known to which kind, and then accidentally turned into a toddler who OD'd on Salva and showed her naked butt to half of Fort Salem, then turned back into her normal self only to claim she doesn't really remember being a butt-flashing, drug-snorting toddler. Sarah pressed her lips together to contain her amusement, then calmly said, Yes, that is what I'm telling you. Okay, Rael laughed. Just checking. Abigail rolled her eyes at the two of them. What are you two, best friends now? Sarah shrugged a shoulder. As Rael has said, we are buds. It was Tally who giggled. Sarah chuckled to herself at the thought. Of course, it was Tally who giggled. Tally was the giggler of any group she found herself a part of. Sarah had never told anyone, but it was one of her favorite things about her. Total buds, Rael confirmed, then poked at Abigail's sides, grinning. And if I didn't know any better, I'd say you were jealous. Abigail scoffed. Please. Bellwethers are above such trivial emotions. Rael cackled like a witch thrice her age and bumped her shoulder against Abigail's. You're so jelly right now that I could put you on toast, Bellwether. Am not. Are too. I am not. You are, Tally said and wrapped her arms around them both. You're lime green jelly, Abigail, and it's adorable. All three of you are ridiculous, Sarah declared as she stood and stretched her neck, a loud crack sounding with the delightful release. Now, why don't you two give Tally a moment to dress? You can carry on together after. Yeah, come on, Ray, Abigail said. Tally doesn't need you to help put her panties on anymore. Every visible inch of Tally flushed red in the hospital's glaring lights. If the heat in Sarah's skin was an indicator, she likely looked the same. She most certainly does not, Sarah said, and Abigail guffawed, pleased with herself. Will you stop making everything weird? Rael grumbled as she pushed Abigail out of the curtain and yanked it close behind them. You know she was a baby and I had to do it because you were afraid of her. Their voices echoed back with every step of their way across the infirmary. I wasn't afraid of her. I told you I just don't like kids. You were afraid. I was not. Abs, I saw your face when she climbed on your back, like I was half convinced you shat yourself. You realize I could summon a tornado strong enough to carry you all the way back to the session, right? You realize I would just come back because I'm on active duty and the army would be all like, nah, get your ass back to base, right? It would be worth it. Would it be worth it when I wind struck your hair off your head the second I got back? Because I don't think you'd be cute bald, Bellwether. At least I'm cute at all. Oh, oh, okay, that was cold. As their voices finally faded, Tally and Sarah shared a long look before Tally burst into a loud, rumbling laugh. She wriggled herself up against Sarah, wrapping her up in her arms and nuzzling into her neck. She sighed once there, joy settling like sleep in her body, heavy and perfect. Sarah reveled in the warmth of Tally, in the full press of her tall body. She ran her palm slowly up and down Tally's back, adding in small circles here and there, kneading with her fingertips. Tally melted under her touch, and the more she folded herself into Sarah, the more complete Sarah felt. "You're tired," Sarah said as she held her, her fingers now digging into Tally's hair to massage her scalp. Tally moaned at the touch. Exhausted. She lay a soft, chaste kiss to Sarah's neck. "So are you. I can feel it." "Yes, but as tempted as I am to simply crawl back into this bed with you and sleep, and as loath as I am to be any distance from you at the moment, I should check on Isadora and Kalida." Tally nodded, her cheek rubbing against Sarah's shirt. "The biddies?" "They are fine," Sarah assured, "though I'm pleased to hear you asking. The bonds have truly been untangled, then?" "Yes," Tally said. "I can still feel them through my connection to you, but I can't hear them any more or feel their direct presence in my head." Sarah nodded and squeezed Tally a bit tighter. "Can you spare me for a moment or two?" I guess so," Tally whined dramatically, but when she pulled back enough to look at Sarah, her face was tender with affection. "But only if you promise to take me to bed the minute we're done here." Sarah quirked one brow, a smile pulling at the corners of her lips. "I thought you were tired." Tally snorted and pinched her side. "I meant to sleep." "Oh, of course you did," Sarah said, though she held her expression, clearly disbelieving. "I did!" "Right." Sarah's smile grew. Her chest felt tight and loose at once, shaken by and full of glee. "Nothing perverted going on in that head of yours at all." "Sure. Since when is wanting to get railed by your wife perverted?" 300 years of war, and Sarah was certain she was about to meet her end by way of choking on air. Air and her own saliva. She blinked rapidly as her throat constricted, and her brain tried to process the fact that those words had just come out of that mouth. Tally had always kept her on her toes, surprising her in ways Sarah never could have dreamed up, but every once in a while, she would say something that made Sarah feel as if her feet were no longer on the ground, something that made her feel as if there was no ground at all. "Wife?" she croaked, and Tally's blooming laugh squeaked into nothing. Her brow scrunched, and she smacked her lips a few times as if she suddenly had a strange taste on her tongue. I, Another laugh squawked through. I don't know why I said that." The words were heavy, like a finger to a button, pressing Sarah's thoughts to life. Her memories. Rapidly, Tally's tiny face flitted through her mind, her little voice speaking mindless comments. More than once she'd said something hinting at marriage, and more than once Sarah had dismissed it. But this again? Now? "Tally," she said, her own brow contorting. Is this something? Should we talk about this?" "No," Tally said, soft and prolonged. "No, it's nothing, right? I was just teasing. I mean, for all intents and purposes, we are married. Kind of, right? But no, it's nothing." She laughed again, a breathy, manic sound that told Sarah she was starting to spiral. "I wasn't serious. It's nothing." "Tally." "No, stop," Tally said, and shooed Sarah towards the curtain. "It's fine. I'm fine. Go check on the others, and I'll get dressed." "Tally, wait," Sarah tried, but Tally only gave her another push. "Go on," she said. "It won't take me long." Sarah sighed and stepped halfway out. "We should talk about this," she said, and Tally looked up at her, cheeks splotched with red. She huffed a bit but relented with a nod. "And Tally?" "Yeah?" Sarah called a smile to her face, the thought of that talk to come both terrifying and, much to her surprise, thrilling. "You are right. she said and lowered her voice to a near whisper. For all intents and purposes, we are married, and wanting to get railed by your wife isn't perverted at all. When Tally's jaw dropped a bit, Sarah's smile turned wide and wicked. I'll be happy to oblige. She didn't give Tally a chance to reply before pulling the curtain closed. The last thing she heard before walking off to find Isadora was Tally's shaky exhale, her quiet, lovely laugh.
Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.